Shalom to the elect of the nation of Israel. It's another edition of the daily edification, the daily exaltation, and it comes to you through the spirit and power of Yahweh Baal Shem Yahushai Baal Shem Rakakwadash. Time is 5:02 in the morning. Today's date is Saturday, June 29th. And we had to work yesterday, myself and Elder Apostle Ramlab. You wouldn't believe what we had to do, man. That's probably one of the craziest jobs we ever had to do. It was 4,000 pounds of crushed stone. Me and Apostle Elder Ramlab had to shovel and wheel that sucker in a wheelbarrow uphill. You only had one wheelbarrow. and bring it to the foundation, and then, our boss, the guy we work for, Mike, spread the stone and made a foundation for what's going to be a shed, I believe a tool shed. And I wasn't able to do no video, which kind of depressed me, we're exhausted. But anyway, Spirit woke me up this morning, and I was watching Elder Apostle Tar's video here, Dr. Eric Mason, Jeremiah 14:2, LOL, which is an acronym for Laugh Out Loud. And, this guy that you see here on screen, Eric Mason, the doctor, which, by the way, the word doctor means falsify. It's from the Latin, which means to falsify. Well, he's at it again. He resurfaced after going into a hiatus for about a month and change. And he's back with his nonsense. And Elder Apostle Tar featured him in this video here. And his breakdown, or attempted breakdown, of Jeremiah 14:2. Once again, he's trying to prove that, the so-called black man, along with, mainly the so-called black man, that he's not the real Jew. We're not the real Jews. Because basically this guy here, who looks like Chef from South Park, he has a problem with us saying that we're Hebrew Israelites because we're so-called black men. And that's just the truth. The Hebrew Israelites were men of color. They were so-called black men. Not black men per se, because there's no such thing as black men. We're we're men of color, deep dark brown. But anyway, I was watching Elder Pastor's video. I watched the whole video, and I wanted to add to what Elder Pastor said, because he went into the word. As a matter of fact, let me get the scripture. Jeremiah 14:2. Let's read it. It says, Judah moaneth, and the gates thereof languish. They are black unto the ground, and the cry of Jerusalem is gone up. Now, the Elder Apostle in his video, which we always do, he went into the word black, which the word there in the Hebrew, if you were to read this in the Hebrew, as a matter of fact, we do have the Hebrew here. That's the beauty of having the blue letter Bible, which, by the way, was introduced to Israel by Elder Apostle Tar. That's a fact. Okay? Got to give credit where credit's due, man. Yeah, there it is right there, black. And in the Hebrew, the word is quadah, which means dark skin. Dark skin. And that ain't talking about no gates. Ain't no gates got dark skin on it. Okay? But what I want to add to what Elder Apostle said was, and this is why the Spirit alerted me this morning. I remember when I first got into the school, we used to teach that at the city, or in the city, you had gates. Okay, you had gates that led into the city. This is how it was done in Israel. See, the ancient world was a lot different than the world of today. Okay, and particularly in Israel, you had cities that, and the cities weren't too big. They were kind of small, but they had one thing in common. They had gates that led into the city. And at those gates, you had the leaders of the city that sat at the door of those gates, or at the doors of those gates. And they conducted business. If you came to the city, the first people you'd run into were the most important people of that city. And it made sense. They would conduct business there. And I also found out the prophets usually would be at the gates of the city. So when Jeremiah 14 and 2, and I have, of course, I got examples in the scriptures to prove everything that I'm saying. When you go into Jeremiah 14 and 2, right? When it says the gates thereof languish, it's going way past the actual gates, which you did have actual gates that led into the city. But when it says the gates thereof languish, it's a metaphor for the most important people of that city, Judah, weren't around. This is when Judah lost their wisdom, lost their not national, so like lost their wisdom, lost their understanding. That's what I want to say. Lost their understanding. Okay, they were being conquered. So the gates thereof language is a metaphor for no wisdom, no understanding, because, like I said, at the gates of the city, you had the most important people that conducted business for that city. And we're going to see this. I have biblical examples to prove this. So that's what it, and those people were people of color. They were dark skinned. Okay, the gates, and nowhere did Eric Mason mention that. I perceive that he's not even aware of that. Okay, that's part of the Israelite history. And I remember this because when I first came to the school back in 1990, we used to teach this. I think it was Elder. I'm pretty sure Elder Apostle Tar went into that, but I believe Elder High Priest Ariah mentioned that. Okay, it was mentioned that at the gates of the city were the most important leaders of that city, and I found an article that supports this, and I'm going to feature it in this lesson. Okay, so let's read Jeremiah 14 and 2 again. Judah moaneth, and the gates thereof languish. They are black unto the ground, which means dark skin. And the leaders of those cities, which were at the gates, they were dark skinned people. They were people of color. They weren't no so called white people. They weren't no Edomites. And the cry of Jerusalem has gone up, right? Because Judah, along with the nation, was being conquered. And at that time, it was the Assyrians that had conquered us and had us in slavery. And our gates were languishing, which means we had no understanding, no wisdom. Because, like I said, the most important people of the city were at the gates. All right, so now let's prove that. Let's go into some examples. And then I'm going to go into the article. Let's go to the book of 2 Samuel 19 and 8. And this has to do with King David, which is a good example to start with. I'm sorry, 2 Samuel. Yep, 2 Samuel 19 and 8, but I'm going to bounce around here. 2 Samuel 19 and 1. And it was told Joab, behold, the king weepeth and moaneth for Absalom. This is after Absalom had gotten killed. Who was Absalom? He was the son of King David. And he was an enemy to King David. He was trying to take King David out. And finally, the Lord brought judgment against Absalom for King David. So, naturally, King David was weeping for his son Solomon. Weeping for his son Absalom. And the victory that day was turned into mourning unto all the people, for the people had said, for the people heard say that day how the king was grieved for his son. And the people gat them by stealth that day into the city, as people being ashamed steal away when they flee in battle. But the king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son. Now, basically, Joab, he got upset with King David because Absalom was trying to kill King David, okay, and take over the throne. So, naturally, Joab, which was King David's right-hand man, was upset with King David. Now, this is what Joab told David to do. I just want to go to the point in the interest of time. Now, therefore, this is Joab speaking to David, right? Therefore, arise, go forth, and speak comfortably unto thy servants. For I swear by the Lord, if thou go not forth, there will not tarry one with thee this night, and that and that will be worse unto thee than all the evil that befell thee from thy youth until now. Then the king arose and sat in the gate. Now, why did he sit in the gate? Because that's where the important men of the city was. The city where King David resided. That's where the important men were. They were at the gate. That's why he went down to the gate. Because Joab wanted him to address the people concerning this matter of I keep saying Solomon, concerning this matter of Absalom. Okay. Then the king arose and sat in the gate, and they told unto all the people, saying, Behold, the king doth sit in the gate. See, this was an important part of our history. Okay, can't stress that enough. The most important people of the city were at the gate. So when it says in Jeremiah 14:2, the gates thereof languish, meaning the important men of the city are gone. Meaning, metaphorically, it means there's no wisdom, there's no understanding. Okay? And you can apply that Jeremiah 14:2 to this day. Okay? First of all, we don't even have no no gates of our city. We don't even have cities, really. You know, Esau got everything. Okay? As a matter of fact, there's a scripture, and I think it's in Ezekiel, and I might go to it, where it speaks about America being the land of unwalled villages. Why is America called the land of unwalled villages? Because back then, you had cities that had walls around them, okay, or that were like a fortress, and that at in those cities you had gates, which led into the city. So that's why America is spiritually known as the land of unwalled villages. Like, case in point, you could be in New York and then you could just drive right into another state, and there's no gates there. You can just drive right into that state, another state. But it wasn't so in Israel. Okay, that's the point. So, and you'd have to know secular history to know this. Okay, anyway. Going back to the scripture, then the king arose and sat in the gate, and they told unto all the people, saying, Behold, the king doth sit in the gate. And all the people came before the king, for Israel had fled every man to his tent. So the point is, why did King David go down to the gate? Because he had to address the people. Okay, the most important people were at the gate. Let's get another example. We're going to go to the Apocrypha, or as King Marshall would say, the Apocryphy. I'm going to go to the book of Judith. Judith Judith is another example of showing how the most important people were at the gate of the city. This is the book of Judith, the 13th chapter. Now, this is after Judith killed Holofernes, okay? And she had to go back to the city and basically report that the Most High was with her and the Lord have brought judgment for the nation of Israel in using her to kill one of our enemies, which was Holofernes. Anyway, let's read it. Judith, the 13th chapter. Again, we're going to bounce around. Now, when the evening was come, his servants made haste to depart, and Bagoes shut his tent without, and dismissed the waiters from the presence of his lord. And they went to their beds, for they were all weary, because the feast had been long. And Judith was left alone in the tent, and Holofernes lying alone upon his bed, for he was filled with wine. Now Judith had commanded her maid to stand without her bedchamber, and to wait for her coming forth, as she did daily, for she said she would go forth to her prayers, and she spoke to Bagoas according to the same purpose. So all went forth, and none was left in the bedchamber, neither little nor great. Then Judith standing by his bed. So Judith was alone with this Holofernes individual. Then Judith standing by his bed said in her heart, O Lord. Now you have to understand that Judith used her beauty. She was exceedingly beautiful. And she used her beauty as a ruse or a trick to deceive Holofernes, to deceive Bagoas and Holofernes, so she could get a moment, because Holofernes wanted to have sex with her, but he was so drunk he passed out. Okay, so that was a moment that Judith seized to be alone with Holofernes, and was able to kill him. Okay. Anyway, we're going to read how Judith killed him. Then Judith, standing by his bed, said in her heart, O Lord, power of all power, look at this present upon the works of mine hands, for the exaltation of Jerusalem. And the Lord was about to use a woman, man, to exalt the whole nation. And that woman was extremely... You see all the so-called pretty women of today? Judith would put them to shame. That's how beautiful Judith was so beautiful, you'd have people fighting on a battlefield, and Judith would walk by and they'd all stare at her beauty. Okay, she was extremely beautiful. Anyway, for now is the time to help thine inheritance. But one thing about Judith is she wasn't a slut. Okay, unlike the women of today. You know, as soon as the women of today know they have beauty, they parade themselves as whores. They shame themselves. And this woman, Judith, had character. Okay? She had one husband. Her husband died, and she never remarried. Okay? So she was what you call a virtuous woman, Judith. Anyway, for now is the time to help thine inheritance, and to execute thine enterprises, to the destruction of of the enemies which had risen against us. Then she came to the pillar of the bed, which was at Holofernes' head, and took down his falchion from thence, and approached to his bed, and took hold of the hair of his head, and said, Strengthen me, O Lord, power of Israel, this day. So she prayed to the Lord to give her strength to do what she was about to do. And she smote twice upon his neck with all her might, and she took away his head from him. So she chopped off his head, and tumbled his body down from the bed, and pulled down the canopy from the pillars. And anon after she went forth and gave Holofernes his head to her maid. And that was another woman working in tandem with Judith. And she put it in her bag of meat. So they twain went together according to the custom unto prayer. And when they passed the camp, they compassed the valley and went up to the mountain of Bethulia and came to the gates thereof. Then said Judith afar off to the watchman at the gate, Open, open now the gate. The Most High, even our power, is with us, to show his power yet in Jerusalem, and his forces against the enemy, as ye have done this day. Now listen good, Judith 13 and 12. Now when the men of her city heard her voice, they made haste to go down to the gate of their city, and they called the elders of the city. Now why they call the elders of the city? Because they were at the gates. The elders of the city, this is the point. The elders of the city reside at the gates. Okay? That was their position. And when they ran all together, both small and great, for it was strange unto them that she was come, so they opened the gate and received them, and made a fire for a light, and stood round about them. So obviously it was at nighttime. Okay? I'm just looking at the other verses. So, I don't really have to read anymore. The point is, Judith went to the gates because that's where the elders of the city was. Okay, and then as you read on, Judith told them and showed them how she had killed this Holofernes individual, which I believe was I believe he was a Syrian, and that set it up for the Lord to deliver us from the Assyrians. Okay, when you go into the whole story. But she went to the gates of the city. Now, finally, there's an article that I found, which will put this even in more, perspective. This is an article entitled, "When King David Sat in the Gate, What Did That Mean?" It says gates in biblical Israel weren't just a doorway into the city. There were where prophets cried out and kings judged. Remember the matter of King David, how he went down to the gate of the city to address the people? Joab told him to do so. There were where prophets cried out and kings judged, and people met like in the ancient city of Dan. Let me give you another example. And then there's, the scripture, Lot was sitting at the gates of Sodom, and Lot was what? One of the councilmen of his city, the city of Sodom. And he sat at the gate. Okay? And check this out. It says, Lot sitting in the gates of Sodom relates the book of Genesis to modern ears. The description in the gates sounds curious, but in biblical times, a gate or gates was not just a passageway through the defensive wall, which was around the city. Now, America doesn't have that. That's why, wait a minute, let me go back to it, because I had mentioned it earlier. That's why America is known as unwalled villages, the land of unwalled villages. Back in the past, your cities were small, and they had gates. Let's see if that script. I know it's in his. Yeah, here it is, Ezekiel, which is a future prophecy. This prophecy is about to happen, dealing with Russia coming against America. That's what this is dealing with. Ezekiel 38 and 11. And thou shalt say, these are the Russians, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. What land is that? America. Unlike in the past, you had cities that had walls around them, and they had a gate, and you had to enter into the gate to get to the city. We just read that about Judith. Okay, and thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest. That's America. That dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Okay? This is the land of unwalled villages. And what does this mean? This means that finally America or Russia is going to come to America. Basically, their missiles are going to come to America and destroy this place. Okay? Because pursuant to Bible prophecy, the Russians, the Iranians, and other different groups are going to come against America in World War III. So this is what that means. Ezekiel 38 and 11. But anyway, let's get back to the main lesson and get back to this article here. To modern ears, the description in the gates sounds curious, but in biblical times, a gate or gates was not just a passageway through the defensive wall surrounding the city. It was typically a massive and often complex structure consisting of an outer gate and an inner gate, or an inner, one providing the second line of defense with a space in between. You've seen that in movies that dealt with the ancient world, like case in point, the movie Braveheart. There was one scene where William Wallace invaded one city in England because it was the Scots coming against the British, and the city was surrounded and had a gate, and he had to go to the gate of the city and attack the gate. Okay, that's in the movie. So that's how it was done back then. Let's read on. It says it was the space between those two gates, sometimes just a corridor with recessed guard rooms, sometimes a more spacious courtyard, that the Bible calls in the gates. Now listen to this, much life took place within that gate area based on biblical references and archaeological finds. That space served as a combination of town hall. Now today we have something called a town hall. Back then that was their town hall. Now in this modern time, the town hall is where the leaders of that city meet, right? The town hall. Legislation is discussed there and important matters of the city, right? Well, it was the same thing back then. But you had a gate. Ad hoc law court. Hyde Park Corner, Marketplace, the Park Bench, and Park Bench, giving you some examples. There's a part here. Jump around. Because it tells you in this article that you had wise men met there, you had prophets. Prophets also met there. Bear with me for a minute. Okay, let's read this here. While it is possible that the platform had a occultic function alongside, it is an unadorned standing stone, often understood as an abstract representation of a deity. Scholars are inclined to see it as the base of the king's seat in the city gate. Here he might sit in judgment. Let's go back to King David. We just read that article, or not that article, but that scripture. Here he might sit in judgment or simply to demonstrate his majesty. We just read the scripture when Joab told King David to go down to the gate. Remarkably, for the period, the Israelite king, almost a constitutional monarch in an age of absolutism, would go out to see and be seen by his subjects at the gate. Yeah, there was a part where I read earlier when it spoke about how the prophets were at the gate, the important men of the city. I mean, you brothers can type in the headline and find it for yourself, but I know I saw it. Well, let's read this again. Gates in biblical Israel weren't just a doorway into the city, they were where prophets cried out and kings judged and people met, like in the ancient city of Dan. So there you go. That's the point. So going back to, in conclusion of the lesson, going back to Jeremiah 14 and 2 again. So when it says the gates thereof languish, that jackass Eric Mason, he's thinking about actual gates, which there were actual gates there, but that's not what that's really talking about. It's not talking about the actual gates, which the city did have an actual gates. It's using it as a metaphor for no wisdom, no knowledge, no understanding. Because at that gate, the actual gate, the most important people of the city, which we've just read the article, and I gave a couple of examples of scripture, the actual people at the gate were the most important people of that city. Okay? And if the gates languish, meaning metaphorically, there's no wisdom, there's no understanding, because the people that represent the important people that represent the city weren't there or aren't there. That's what that means. Okay, Eric Mason. So back in Jeremiah 14 and 2 again, Judah moaneth in the gates thereof languish. Now you know what that means. Now you know the significance of that. The gates thereof languish, meaning there's no wisdom, there's no knowledge, there's no understanding. And I remember, like I said, I learned that a long time ago when I first came into school. They are black unto the ground, meaning they're people of color, and the cry of Jerusalem has gone up. Why? Because they've gone into captivity. No wisdom, no knowledge, no understanding. Right? Which is what happens when you go into captivity. All right. So with that, as Elder Apostle Tar always says, it's on to the next one. Hopefully, you brothers were edified. Sorry for my slur in speech, but like I said, well, you see the time. It's 5:34 in the morning. This was on my mind, and I had to put it, like they say, put it on wax, man. Strike while the iron's hot, because I was already a little disappointed that I didn't have any title or topic, because I was, me and Apostle Elder Rama, man, we were exhausted, man, from shoveling that 4,000 pounds of crushed stone, man, up a damn hill. You think your elders don't work? Anyway, it's on to the next one. Hopefully you brothers were edified. Shalom.